and welcome to another edition of Potluck, your everything and anything talk and entertainment TV show. My name is Laura Hartman, and I am your host. Today we have a very special guest joining us, and he has a hobby that is called Audiophile, and it's not like an audio file that you have on your computer. With me, I have Frank Giglio. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Okay. So before we get to talking about Audiophile, and you can explain also what Audiophile is and how it's spelled, what do you do for your full-time job?
I have an interior design and window treatment company.
Okay. And how long have you been doing that?
About, let's see, altogether interiors about 30 years.
Okay. And do you ever come across people that are interested in the audiophile stuff when you do their windows and?
Yeah, occasionally, and it's always like a real big surprise.
Uh-huh.
And it's usually somebody in my age bracket, and I recognize a piece of equipment in their house, and they say, "How did you know that? Because nobody else has ever known that."
Right.
So,
oh, very cool. Okay, so tell us about Audiophile. What exactly?
Well, an audiophile, I think, I'm not going to quote Webster's or anything, but pretty much it's somebody that is concerned with the quality of reproduced sound, mostly music.
Okay. And now the audiophile is spelled, it's with P-H-I-L-E.
Typically A-U-D-I-O-P-H-I-L-E.
Okay, great. And how did you get involved with it? Where did it all begin for you?
Well, I always had sort of an interest in sound. My parents bought me, I think in the mid-60s, at Sears, a little cassette player.
Okay.
My friends and I used to goof around with it. And I was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9, and then my brother bought a compact stereo that was a high-quality stereo at the time from a manufacturer called KLH, and it had a record changer and a tuner and an amplifier, and he had kind of big speakers, and it reproduced bass. And for some reason, I just took my interest. I'm not sure why, what it did, but I guess because I was interested in sound to begin with.
Okay.
And that's really where it started.
Okay. And then as time has gone on, you know, we, of course, in today's day and age, we're using, you know, iPad or iPhones and, you know, iPads and, you know, other computer music, and we've gone away from, you know, like the tapes and the vinyl records that you have here on the table. What's the difference? I mean, we have Bose and, you know, iTunes. What?
Well, I guess in terms of convenience, nothing beats digital, that's for sure.
Okay.
And it's like cassettes were better than records in terms of convenience. And then the stereo record was more convenient than the old gramophone. So, you know, I guess convenience drives a lot of technology, but sometimes there's a backlash because the technology, I think, when it's marketed, is a little immature.
Okay.
So when I think if you were to really think about the roots of quality music reproduction, you know, there was a big lull with the music recording started. I guess they had an interest in an improvement in audios in the audio in the 20s, but then you had the Depression, and that wiped everything out.
Right.
Then you had the war effort, and of course some technologies coming from the war effort infused into electronics and home reproduction and music. And then once that all settled down, and so most people were in the early 50s, I think more than half of the music reproduced in homes was still a gramophone. It was purely a mechanical device, right?
Okay.
So then in 52 or 53, Columbia Records invented the LP for convenience because radio shows wanted some kind of a record that if they were going to have a show but they didn't want to broadcast it all at the same time, they had to record it. So they came up with an LP because recorded time, I think, on the old gramophones was something like 12 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And so when they came out with the LP, meaning long playing, they started to make recording times up to 8, 15, and then 18, and then 20 minutes. And when Columbia came out with that, it was electronically transcribed. So it wasn't purely a mechanical transcription.
Right, right.
And that advance in technology brought forth an advance in an improvement in reproduction in the home. And then I think that's when people said the war was over, the U.S. economy was doing good, and people started to listen to recorded music and more. And then I think, thank God, with the advent of rock and roll, it really popularized music.
Right.
And everybody started to listen. And so in the 50s and 60s, you had this, everybody was, you know, tuned into music in some way or another, or many people were. And I think that's when the recording industry and the playback equipment industry started to really come up. And then in the era of the Vietnam War, you know, Japanese manufacturing production started and all throughout the Eastern Asia. And I meet a lot of guys that had served our country in the Vietnam War, and I could always tell because they have a Vietnam era stereo, but that was when that really popularized stereo, because the Japanese were all about the quality of the sound and about presentation.
Sure.
So it didn't look like your dad's radio, and it was attractive, and it had pretty faceplate and a lot of knobs, and that guys really started to pique their interest. And then the high-end audiophile community, I think, started probably in the early 70s. There was at the time a popular magazine out for that hobbyist called Stereo Review. And there was a gentleman that used to review for that called Julian Hirsch, and he showed the guy in a white lab coat. But his theory was if amplifiers measured the same, they all sounded the same. And that was so blatantly untrue. And there was an enormous backlash from that in the audiophile community. And that's when people like Harry Pearson at the Absolute Sound and Jay Gordon Holt Stereophile said, wait a minute, can you hear it all? Are you deaf?
Right.
Because it wasn't true. And I think it's really because although two things might have measured the same, they were only measuring certain parameters, but some of the parameters that were pertinent to music reproduction weren't being measured. So anyway, there's a big backlash of that, and sort of the underground stereo stuff started coming out. That's when audiophiles came out and said, wait a minute, I can hear differences and stuff. And I think one of the big things was, you know, in the 50s and early 60s, tube electronics were what you listened to. Then the transistor became popularized, and in the mid to late 60s and early 70s, all the manufacturers that made tube gear were then making solid state, and that was the improvement, right? It was reliable, you didn't have to worry about changing tubes. But again, people listened to it and said, wait a minute, this sounds really bad. Tubes sound better. So there was an enormous, again, from technology, there was enormous backlash to say, the new technology is no good. Well, it was the release of an immature technology.
Okay. So
and same thing, go ahead.
I'm sorry, when you say tube, are they tubes that are inside the, you know, like in a television or like in the...
do you know what glass tubes are? You've seen them.
I've seen them like in TVs, but
old little TVs, you see a glass tube and they glow when you turn them on?
Yeah, okay.
Well, that was the voltage gain device back in the 60s and 70s. That's how you increase the voltage for amplification. Then transistors became, started to come into the market. And they had a lot of advantages. Again, it's like sort of the iPod today. The transistor was much smaller, compact. You didn't have to worry about heat, didn't worry about breaking it. It was much more reliable. But because the technology, when it was introduced to the consumer, was immature, it didn't sound as good. It was more convenient, but it didn't sound as good. And so again, that I think helped to fuel the audiophile people that said, wait a minute, now you're telling us to buy transistors, and aren't you listening to this stuff? Because it really sounds bad.
Right.
And it wasn't probably until the late 70s and early 80s where people that were electrical design engineers, instrumentation guys mostly, started to say, wait a minute, okay, we can fix how a transistor sounds. We can make it more linear. A transistor is linear as a current gain device, but when used as a voltage gain device, it's inherently nonlinear. So you have to find a way, you have to figure out a way to make it linear. Tubes were already voltage linear as a gain device. So anyway, long story short, again, there was that big backlash in the 70s and 80s, and then people said, wait a minute, we can make it better. And then today, I think solid state is better. You know, whenever you listen to any kind of a reproduction of anything, there's always colorations, and the key is to get as few as you can, right?
Right.
So today's electronics do a much better job of not coloring things as much. And that's what you're always seeking, but the transistors had a great deal of coloration in the beginning, and as today rolled on and people put their endeavors towards making it sound better, and again, that's fueled the industry, because now there are many different manufacturers. Most guys that have audio design companies have, especially in the 70s and 80s, they came from electronics design houses, they came from NASA, they were research people and scientists, and you know, they did this as a love because they weren't making a lot of money doing it.
Right.
They did it as a real joy.
Right.
And it's, you know, so, and then the backlash in technology happened again in audio. Like I remember when I went to hear my first compact disc, it was a big thing, stereo, it's going to get rid of records. You know, the quote was, perfect sound forever. Yeah, right. Bad sound forever. So when we went to hear it, I remember I went with a couple guys that owned a design company called Princeton Design Group, a couple guys I used to work with, brilliant design engineers, and they loved what they did.
Right.
And we heard the CD and we said, what are we missing here? Because this doesn't sound good. And of course, consumers all bought it because, like my wife, because it was convenient. No more records, don't have to worry about scratching it. Can't bring a record to the car, cassettes wear out, so they brought the CD, and it was more convenient. But just now, it's starting to sound close to good vinyl. So again, you had an old technology that for a long time sounded better until the implementation of that technology caught up to the technology itself.
Right.
And now guys are going away from, you probably know, from physical media playing, and they're doing digital downloads where it's sort of, what do they call that? It's a reality thing where you're not touching anything anymore.
Okay.
So now you download it from the computer. One benefit to that is, of course, less stuff to carry around, compressed data storage.
It's quick.
But it does also, there is an advantage in it in that the CD, you have the transport that spins the CD to worry about. And with digital downloads, you don't have that. That's one less thing to make a mistake.
Right.
So you can sort of get at the closer to the music better.
Okay.
So.
Now, what is, you know, the difference in the sound? I mean, like what are some of the different qualities that we're missing out listening on an iPad?
Well, I think that most people, and especially younger people like my kids, if you play a record and you play a CD, both are going to have colorations, right? But the records have more of a warmth to them.
Okay.
And it's and a lot of audiophiles refer to that as a more musical quality, because sometimes you can listen to digital, and especially younger people that have an enhanced sense of high frequency sensitivity hearing, they will they'll tell you, gee, and they all use that term, my daughter, my son, Dad, that sounds warmer. That, and I don't tell them, I don't use that descriptor. That's something that's, so I think you'd hear more of a natural warmth. And the goal in an audiophile system today, or a music reproduction system, is to try to recreate a musical event in your listening environment.
Okay.
And so like when you go to a musical event, let's say you go to hear 3 or 4 people play a jazz ensemble. If you close your eyes, you can hear where the drums are and where the guitarist is and so forth, or the saxophone, but you can hear that and you can almost sense with your eyes closed the 3-dimensionality about it. And in music reproduction, that's something that you try to reproduce, is that feeling of a live event. And it's an awesome thing to try to, I'm sure impossible to reproduce, but if you do the right things, you can get closer to that ideal.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so you participate in some of the festivals that happen. I mean, I've never, you know, up until meeting you, I never even knew what audiophile is. I mean, back in the 70s, you saw the big stereo systems and the big speakers. And, but, you know, tell us about the festivals that they have.
Well, there's, you know, what's happened in the industry, if you went back to the early 70s, there weren't as many manufacturers as there are today. So a lot of guys that have, again, a background in engineering, they think they could do something better, and they'll make something in the way of a CD player, a phonograph needle, something, okay, and they market. So the industry is much more fragmented in the high end. So what high-end manufacturers have said was, although we're vying for the same piece of the market's shrinking. So they have festivals throughout Europe and the United States today that bring high-end manufacturers, that give them a commonality, a common place to display their wares.
Okay.
And consumers are invited where they can go and at least experience this and see the different possibilities and hear one thing versus the next. And it's nice that, you know, that the industry is kind of coming together as one to at least educate people that, hey, we've got this great thing out here. You know, because I at least for me, I think of the various forms of art, music goes directly to your emotional sense.
Oh, sure.
You're not analyzing. It's not like I'm looking at a painting and trying to figure out what's going on. And you know, the relationship of tonality in frequency and in time it does something to your human being. And there are some people I've had 2 experiences where I've had friends or clients who had a dementing parent, and in both situations, at some point in their dementia, the person could only talk through singing, and it was the relationship of melodic notes of things that related to each other on a melody basis that allowed them. So it's a key thing to a human being.
Wow.
You know, the note and the relationship of them. And so I think people miss out on that. And if you can expose somebody to that, it's really a beautiful thing.
Okay.
So
yeah. So I mean, would how about musicians? You know, people that are in bands or whatever. They would probably have an affinity to go into a festival like this.
Well,
perhaps?
you would think sometimes they're more about the message and the product than they are about the reproduction of it, and that's very common. But some artists are very much about the recorded quality, like Neil Young.
Okay.
Neil Young is huge about recorded quality. In fact, he's coming out with his own digital, I believe, his own digital player and a way to record. I think he calls it pure tone or in tone.
Okay.
I'm not 100% accurate on it, but he's always been very much about recording. And where a lot of artists may go into the recording studio today and record strictly in the digital medium, he still records on analog tape.
Oh.
Because to his ear, it sounds better and it sounds more like real music.
Right.
So.
Is that what Pearl Jam does? I mean,
Pearl Jam is a.
Because they put out LPs as well, right?
They release records today. A lot of the bands do, and in indie music, it's real popular. Okay. And there's a big resurgence today in the vinyl market. In the audiophile market, there's companies like Analog Productions or Sundays Records that record everything in analog, no digital medium at all, and go, in fact, many times direct to the disc and not even on the tape. They go from a microphone to an amplifier to a cutting head to the disc.
Right.
Which is, so there's less windows to see through, less coloration.
Right.
So that, you know, there are people still very much about that, and some of them are the musicians, but I think musicians as a whole are more worried about the overall musical message than the sonic finesse of it. You know?
Right, right, so. Or the sales maybe. So you set up Audiophile in homes? You set up sound systems?
Well,
in
for
homes?
myself, I'm not, I want to go on record, I'm not an expert, I'm just a hobbyist.
Okay.
But I've enjoyed it for 40 some years.
Okay.
And it's always a pleasure I have a customer who recently was a great music fan. I mean, goes to I don't know how many performances a year, really a big music fan. And we're just going to get him set up, my friend and I, with a little high-end system. We said, man, you got to hear this reproduced in a better way. Because as much as you love music, I think that it really will enhance your enjoyment and appreciation of it. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is just to bring in pleasure and fun to, you know, something that people already enjoy. Why not enhance that? You know, it's like watching a high-def TV, same kind of thing.
Okay. So I have a question. So like if I, or like, not me, myself, because I don't, but maybe my mother has an old stereo system at home and it has an LP record. If she played that and then compared that to like an
iDevice of some sort,
right? Like I'll hear that soft.
Well, I think to the.
Or does it depend on the actual stereo system?
That it does, and it's got to be set up right, and it's to the pedestrian listener. The digital is going to sound better than a record, because especially if the record isn't set up right. So we should say, I mean, to get a record to sound right, it takes a good turntable, set up right in the right environment, like the old stereo consoles that people's parents had. Right? My parents had one. Well, that was really a bad thing because you had a record player in there in the same cabinet as speakers, and speakers vibrate, and a phonostylus, a record player, is a vibration sensing device. So you don't want any vibration at all to get to that. And here they had it in a speaker cabinet, essentially.
Wow.
So the worst thing you could do. So that wasn't a good thing to do. So in that regard, everybody will listen to the digital and say, man, that sounds better. And the first thing the digital did when it came out in a compact disc is it made it very portable. It made it not susceptible to defacing easily. Like I remember when I went to see the first demonstration of a CD, the guy demonstrating it took a CD out and he took a car key and he scratched it and he put it in the player and it still played great. I mean, that was the big selling feature. You know, you couldn't destroy it. again, perfect sound forever. It sounded bad, but you couldn't hear the scratches. So,
right.
I mean, where's the win on that? So
Right.
I think that for you to really enjoy records, it has to be set up to a level that's at least satisfactory technically.
Okay.
So, and again, a lot of people, records sound a bit because they never took the time to set the record player up right. It's all, you know, it's a little tweaky. I guess it's like saying, you know, if you have a Ferrari and it's not tuned right, it ain't going to run good.
Right,
Right?
right.
Once you got it set up right, there you go. So
Okay.
it's the same with audio.
Okay, so if
Any high performance item.
right, so if somebody wanted to, you know, put a audio system in their house, or you know, get the turntable and set
All
up the
that.
whole, yeah,
Or
like,
just a
like
good
what
digital
you
player.
have,
Huh?
they would have to hire somebody to do that for them.
Well, no, I think the first thing you would go out and you'd explore it. So you go to a hi-fi salon, somebody that sells high-end equipment.
High Five Salon.
A dealer,
Okay.
a
Okay.
store.
Okay.
But they specialize, like probably a popular one would be Best Buy has Magnolia. And if
Okay.
you go in the back in the Magnolia store, they have more of their better stuff set up. And that sounds better than, you know, just the average thing.
Sure.
Although the ones I've been in, they use a very poor signal source, so it never sounds its best anyway. But if you go to a high-end dealer, you know, and it's being an old-fashioned person, I guess, I'm much against online models because you need to experience it. And a good high-end dealer will talk to you about what's the acoustics of your room like,
Right.
and you know how to balance the system. If I have X dollars, what portion do I apportion to the speakers or the cable or the amplifier or the signal source, and how do I make this all happen? But I think if you start with that and you get somebody that you like and you can trust as a dealer, a lot of times the dealers will come out to your house, they'll set it up, they'll look at the environment, and then you start to build it.
Okay.
And you know, I think for, you know, their audiophiles today spend $200,000 and $300,000 on the system.
Wow.
Easily. And I'll say this, the last high-end show I was at, I was in New York last year, I think it was in April or May, and I listened to many high-end systems that were 200 and 300K, and a lot of them sounded bad. But that's the testament to setting it up right, and they're having a traveling system. They haven't tweaked the system to the room.
Okay.
So it's all about an integration of the whole thing. And again, being a hobby, it does take time and energy.
Right.
And I think a lot of people would say, well, why can I have to do that when I can put the iPad on,
Right.
listen to that, and boom, off I go and it sounds good? Well, I mean, I think like any art, just imagine if you're driving down the road and you're trying to appreciate a Renoir, I don't even know an artist, but let's say a popular, great, world-class artist.
Sure.
Can you do that while you're driving down the road? No.
Right.
It's the same with music. You have to sit and you have to be able to experience it and immerse yourself a little bit in it.
Okay.
So the portable audio, while it's convenient, I think is a distraction.
Right.
You got to be able to go, I mean, if you want to enjoy music, go and listen to it. Relax, have a glass of wine, and immerse yourself a little. Spend an hour.
Okay.
So, you know, I think the first thing is to realize, do I like music enough to want to do that? And is it something that I find appealing? And again, I think the best thing is to go to find a local audio salon, an audiophile dealer. There's 5 or 6 in the metro area, and go and listen and see if, you know, bring a favorite record or CD, whatever it is, and put it in. It's like, does that do anything for me? Can I really hear a difference?
Right.
So,
Now, do they have like special rooms that are set up, like audio rooms?
well, a good dealer is going to have the rooms prepared for an audio system. So you want to, you know, when you have excessive energy in a room, you have excessive energy. You want to be able to absorb that. So acoustic treatments are important. And there are a lot of people that spend an incredible amount of money on an audio system, but that never get the room right.
Oh, okay.
And you'll never really hear the system and its benefit unless with that system you consider the room.
Right.
I had my parents both went through dementia, and at the end, I just lost my mom, but
I'm
she lived
sorry.
with me for 12 years. But I put a little high-end system in her bedroom, and it's amazing when the music would play how she reacted. And I had that system set up in one of my kids' rooms, but my mom's room, for some reason, acoustically matched the system better, and it sounded phenomenal.
Wow.
There's a little integrated amp and speakers and CD player, but it made a big difference in my mother's life. And I put the things on that she liked to listen to, Dean
Sure.
Martin, Frank Sinatra, and Enrico Caruso. That was her generation. But it made a difference in her daily life.
Right. Right.
And she wasn't even able to really articulate that.
Sure.
But you could see
Sure.
from her behavior it affected her. So music, I think, it makes a difference in people's lives.
Oh, sure.
So.
Yeah, and then the sound quality. So, you know, before the show, you were talking about how you said, well, earlier you were saying children have a better sound for music, and also women. You said there aren't many women that are into audiophile, but women. Tell us about the difference in their ears.
Well, when you
ear sounds.
when you're young, I would imagine you have the best blood flow in your body. So the arteries that go to your hearing mechanism, which is a cochlea, your arteries are clean and clear. And as you age, they're very, very, very tiny arteries. They start to fill up with plaque, and that nerve gets damaged. And a lot of people will get tinnitus because of that ringing in the ear.
Right.
That means the nerve is dying.
Okay.
And I know I've lost my high frequencies. So that what you lose first in hearing is the smallest, the little delicate frequencies, right?
Right.
So they're the high frequencies. But kids, and where a lot of the differences in high end exist, are in the high frequencies, say above 10 kilohertz. When I was a young man, I used to hear out to 20 kilohertz. That's thought to be the extent of human hearing is from 20 cycles a second to 20,000. And I could hear ultrasonic alarms in department stores are 18, 19 kilohertz. I had to leave the store because it would bother me. Now, maybe I had a hypersensitivity to it.
Sure.
Right? But younger people can hear that. And that's when they can really tell the differences most. In women, their bone structures are smaller. They have a better acuity for high frequency sounds than men do. So really, women usually can hear better than men.
Wow, okay.
So, but it's not a hobby that you find a lot of women in. I'm not quite sure why.
Right.
Maybe it's that techie thing. I don't know.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for coming to our show today. It's been a pleasure, and learning about Audiophile, which is AUDIOPHILE,
Right.
and not the audiophile that you have on your computer.
Right.
So, anyway, do you have any web addresses for what you do during the daytime?
Well, if people want to go to my company web address, and there's a response button you can hit on there where we'll tweak it. And if they like the show and they just want to talk about stereo, I'm always happy to meet stereo guys.
Okay.
It's valueblinddesign.com. So it's VALUE BLINDDESIGN.com. If they go there, we'll always like to meet a fellow audiophile.
Great, great. And thank you all for joining us today. If you're just tuning in, you can catch us on the web at www.potluck-online.org. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.